Right now, you have 52 apps on your phone, a streaming platform with more content than you could watch in 3 lifetimes, in a YouTube algorithm that knows you better than your closest friends. And somehow, in the middle of all that, you still find yourself staring at the ceiling, doing nothing. So here's the question nobody bothers to ask. What did the very first humans do when boredom hit? Not ancient Greeks, not Mesopotamians, not even early Egyptians. We're going back further. 150,000 years, 200,000 years, back before written language, before organized religion, before music had a name. Just people, fire, silence, and nothing to do. What they did next explains almost everything about how your mind works today. But let's back up. Did boredom even exist that far back? For decades, the assumption was no. Survival consumed everything. Every hour was spent hunting, foraging, staying alive. There was no room for restlessness. Except that turned out to be completely wrong. In 1966, anthropologist Marshall Solins published findings that quietly dismantled that assumption. He'd spent years living alongside the Kung people of the Kalahari, one of the last groups on Earth living in a way that closely mirrors how our earliest ancestors operated. What he found stopped researchers cold. They worked roughly 15 to 20 hours a week, per week, not per day. The rest was rest, sitting, talking, existing without agenda. Solins called them the original affluent society, not because they had possessions, but because they had something modern humans are chronically short on: unstructured time. So ancient humans weren't too busy to get bored. They were bored constantly. The real question is what that boredom built.
Start with the obvious. They made things. In 2010, archaeologist Francesco de Errico and his team examined a collection of shells from Blombos Cave in South Africa. The shells dated back 75,000 years. Each one had a hole carefully drilled through it. Each one was stained with red ochre. These weren't tools. They served no survival function whatsoever. They were beads. Someone, 75,000 years ago, with no deadline and no entertainment, sat down and spent hours crafting personal ornaments out of seashells. That's the oldest decorative object ever found, and it almost certainly began with someone having absolutely nothing to do. Think about what that actually required. Drilling through a shell using a stone tool by hand with no electric light, no background music, no way to check how much time had passed. That is a long, slow afternoon. And they chose it anyway, because creation, even tedious creation, was more bearable than pure emptiness. Art wasn't born from necessity. It was born from a mind that couldn't stand the quiet and decided to do something about it. The same story shows up in music. In 2008, a cave in southwestern Germany yielded something remarkable: a flute carved from the hollow bone of a vulture. 5 finger holes, unmistakably intentional. 40,000 years old. Whoever made it had no tradition of music to draw from, no teacher, no reference point. They just had time and curiosity and apparently a vulture bone lying around. Neuroscientist Daniel Levitin, who has spent his career studying music's origins, argues that our capacity for rhythm and melody predates language itself. The brain was wired for pattern long before it could construct a sentence, because pattern recognition, the ability to notice repetition and anticipate what comes next, was a survival tool. Music was just what happened when that tool had nothing urgent to do. But the most consequential thing boredom produced wasn't art or music, it was imagination.
Here's the thing about boredom that doesn't get said enough. You cannot experience it without a concept of time. To feel bored, you have to sense that this moment is stretching out, that somewhere beyond it other things are possible, that the future is real and might be different from right now. That is not a small cognitive feat. That is the brain becoming aware of its own existence in time. Animals wait. They don't get bored. A wolf resting between hunts isn't calculating what it's missing, it's just resting. But a human sitting at the edge of a fire 100,000 years ago, with the night pressing in and nothing demanding attention, starts to drift. What happens if the hunt fails tomorrow? What made that sound in the dark? What is the sky made of? Where does a person go after they stop breathing? Every question that ever became a religion started that way. Every question that ever became philosophy. Every question science is still circling. They all came from the same place, a mind with spare time and nowhere obvious to point it. In 2013, psychologist Sandy Mann ran a simple experiment. She gave participants one of the most aggressively dull tasks she could design, copying numbers from a telephone directory, and then measured their creative output immediately after. The bored group wasn't just slightly more creative, they dramatically outperformed everyone else. Because when the brain is starved of external input, it doesn't go quiet, it starts generating. That's what it was built to do in the gaps. And then there's the last thing ancient humans did with their downtime, the one that may have mattered most of all.
They talked, not strategically, not about logistics or planning. They talked the way people still talk when nothing particular is happening. They talked about each other. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar, known for identifying that human social groups naturally stabilize around 150 people, spent years cataloging casual human conversation. His conclusion, around 65% of it is social in nature. Who did something, what someone said, what happened to a mutual acquaintance, gossip in the bluntest terms. This looks like idleness. It wasn't. Dunbar's argument is that language didn't evolve to coordinate hunts or describe terrain. It evolved to manage relationships at scale. Before language, our primate relatives bonded through physical grooming, effective but slow and strictly one-to-one. Language let you tend to a relationship without touching anyone. You could bond with 5 people around a fire simultaneously. You could build trust with someone through a story about a third person who wasn't even there. You could knit a community together through shared narrative. Gossip wasn't a distraction from civilization. It was the mechanism through which civilization became possible. Society didn't emerge from strategy. It emerged from people with nothing pressing to do, sitting together, talking about each other. So, here's what the timeline actually looks like. 75,000 years ago, someone bored in a coastal cave made the world's first known piece of jewelry. 40,000 years ago, someone in a European cave invented an instrument. And somewhere in the long stretch between and beyond, people sitting around fires with unscheduled evenings started asking questions so large that we are still answering them. Some of those questions became gods. Some became laws. Some became science. Some became the particular way your thoughts drift when you can't sleep and the room is dark and there's nothing pulling at your attention. Modern psychology has a name for what happens when you never let that happen: cognitive overload. When every moment is filled, the brain never gets to run the processes that require stillness. The default mode network, the neural system that activates specifically when you're not focused on anything, is the same system tied to creativity, empathy, and self-awareness. It doesn't switch on when you're stimulated. It switches on when you're bored. We spent the better part of 300,000 years learning to do something with silence. Then we built devices specifically designed to make sure silence never occurs. And we've been reaching for them ever since.
But every time you put it down, every time you sit somewhere without filling the space, every time your mind starts moving in no particular direction and you let it go, you're running the same process the beadmaker ran, the same one the flute carver ran, the same one that looked at the night sky and couldn't leave it alone. Boredom didn't slow ancient humans down. It's the thing that made them who they were. And it might still be doing the same for you if you give it the chance.